Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to our weekly Legends of Runeterra metagame breakdown. We have the first fresh stats since the last patch, even though it wasn't a balance patch. mobalytics resets the stats, the data sheets after every patch, so they even reset it after the latest patch 1.3. That was just bug fixes and clarity and so on. So we get a more recent and more sort of in a vacuum look at what the metagame looks like in the last week, as opposed to how it changed this in the last week relative to the 2 weeks before. So that is nice. So we basically get like data built from scratch every 2 weeks technically, the way it looks right now. So it's not quite like having isolated data every week like we had with the sheets before it went up on the site, but we at least have data from the last week. So we have a very recent look at what the last week specifically looked like. Then we get another week of data added on top of it. That mainly gives us an idea how things shifted around a bit from the week before, but not how different the latest week is relative to the week before, but more like how things progressed, sort of. So we're gonna look at what the first week of the non-balance change patch has looked like to get an idea what the metagame currently is like and where it's headed. And as usual, gonna talk about the top 5 most played decks and the top 5 highest win rate decks, and I'll give you my thoughts, evaluations, and so on. But you know the drill. Before we do, hit the subscribe button down below to not miss out on future content, and let me briefly introduce you to today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, one of the leading virtual private network providers out there. A virtual private network keeps your data secure and yourself anonymous while using the internet. NordVPN comes with super fast servers, allows you to unlock your favorite entertainment websites like Netflix. They provide a 30-day money-back guarantee. They also have an included cybersecurity suite, which acts as an ad blocker to boot. They don't lock any of your data, provide a 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 6 simultaneous connections, so one account covers most or all of your electronic devices. And most importantly, they don't have any bandwidth limit, so you can use it non-stop without it getting throttled, which is particularly important for heavy users like us. It also won multiple awards and comes highly recommended by top technology experts. So if you're still surfing online without a VPN, now is the time to change that. Get NordVPN now, 70% off for a 3-year plan, including 1 month extra for free using the code ManuS or the personalized link in the description down below. And now on to today's content. Alright, so let's take a look. In 5th place of most popular archetypes, we still have Ashcedrani, so the deck is still kind of like hanging around at the edges. Bit surprised I don't see it that much. I still don't think the deck is very good. It's probably better than the old Ash deck used to be when it first was around, but it's still at best a tier 2 deck, maybe worse than that. And I honestly don't really see any reason to play the deck other than just actively wanting to and enjoying it, because there are just plenty of decks you can do much better with, and its win rate also kind of reflects that. Like if I look at the win rate of the deck, give me a second. The win rate is alright at 55%, but it's like nothing special. So the deck, I think, is more popular for what it does and how it plays and people liking it than that it is just performing exceptionally well, unlike some other decks. So yeah, nothing really changed. The version is still the same, which is a bit curious to me, like 2 steel, 2 elixir, 2 wins, and so on. Like a lot of these numbers are a bit wonky to me. Especially the 3rd elixir seems kind of like something that you would really want. And the Fortunecedrani is something that I could see, but you really have this like issue of a lot of 6s, so I guess that makes sense. But yeah, all in all, the deck hasn't changed much and isn't gonna change too much. I could certainly see messing around with some of the elements of the older Ash deck, like for example trying the 3/2 that gives quick attack to make your Glory Seekers better, stuff like that. But I'm not too interested in the archetype because, like I said, I think the ceiling of the deck is fairly low, so there isn't much point in investing in it from my perspective. Anyway, on to number 4. After being kind of on the map as a high win rate deck, but not a high play rate or popularity deck, now the Elusive Burn deck that I think first got pioneered once again by Tier Red. Tier Red has brought us other very interesting and strong decks in the past, like the Hecarim Dawn and Dusk Ephemeral Deathmark deck some time ago before a bunch of nerfs happened, and now this deck. Other people have iterated on it to make it notably better by, for example, adding Precious Pet, making it operate a bit more smooth and consistently and a little less dirtily, which was one of my main gripes with the first version. So this is a lot better in this specific version, because this is not Tier Red's version. I'm probably going to give it another shake. When I tried it in the past, it played about as awkwardly to me as it looks on paper with some of the weird, dirtily clunky things. And it felt like you're either crushing a certain kind of decks, or you're really struggling keeping up with decks that put enough pressure on you because you have a lot of these like tempo inefficient weird things, or a lot of potential for weird textured draws that line up awkwardly. But the deck seems to not be going away. I'm still not convinced it is better than traditional Kinko Elusives, but it certainly seems to be a force to be reckoned with, and maybe it is better. I'll give it another try. I've been doing really, really well with Kinko Elusives, while so far my attempts at giving this a shot have not really been met with success, and also not with like the impression that it like feels that reliable and consistent and smooth in how it plays. But I'll give it another go probably on the next stream. So yeah, this is kind of one of the newer decks, and I think we wouldn't see it as clearly if the data wouldn't have been reset a week ago, because the number would have been still so small that it wouldn't have remotely made it into the top 5 over multiple weeks, given how many games are being played. Which is why I think these smaller window data sets are so important, because you are much more aware of new and changing trends of decks that were really popular a week before, but barely being played the week after, still potentially show up in the top 5 over 2 weeks. But if you look at it on a week-by-week basis, they don't, and you suddenly see that the metagame is already moving on, which you wouldn't see if you look at multiple weeks. So yeah, nice to see, and I think the fact that we are seeing this now in the top 4 has both to do with its growing popularity as well as the reset of the data to 0, basically. One last note maybe. It seems like there's still potential room for some improvement, like the numbers don't seem super set in stone, like the 1 retreat, the 2 twin disciplines, and the 2 will of Ionia, and the 2 conspirators are all cards I could see shifting around or replacing with stuff potentially, and I'm also not 100% sure that the 3rd monk is absolutely correct, but I'll need to play it more to get a better idea on these aspects. Next, we're back to same old Viheimerdinger, Viheimerdinger. Not really going away, just a little less popular in 3rd place here. This is still the same. Deck is figured out. One thing I can say is I'm not a big fan of Claws of the Dragon. Like, the card's kind of underwhelming in a lot of cases and happens kind of late for free anyway, and not that often at burst speed either, which is kind of like the main appeal. While Campunk Pickpocket is still a really powerful unit, and every time it connects, you like really getting far ahead. And I would totally try just going back to Campunk over Claws, since the upside of Claws seems very situational and marginal, while the ceiling of Campunk is really, really good. And every time you play Claw for 2 power on turn 2, Campunk would be so much better for various reasons. Then we have Fortunecedrani, still hanging out around the top. Deck is really popular. People really like stealing cards from opposing decks. The deck plays a lot of strong individual cards. I still have my gripes with the deck as a whole in terms of its inherent features and stuff, but there's no denying that it has a lot of power to it and is doing pretty well. But for example, it's pretty bad against the elusive strategies in my experience, and probably only does so against Endure, for example. So it's a deck that seems notably overplayed to me, and the win rate suggests that is true to at least a certain extent. Win rate is slightly below 57%, while the other decks in the same popularity as like Elusives, Viheimerdinger, Endure have win rates around 60+%. So it's certainly in a different league. It's closer to Ashcedrani than the top performing decks in terms of what it does. It is certainly better than Ashcedrani, but I think the dynamics at play here are a bit similar between both decks, except this one being a better deck, but probably not as good as its popularity might imply. This is still certainly probably the best version of it, with some potential minor adjustments that I mentioned in the past, like maybe swapping out Navigator for Razor Scale Hunter, like minor adjustments like that, basically. But that's really all I can think of. And in first place, They Who Endure, Enduring Shadow Isles, takes the top spot. It has become more and more popular. It's really powerful. It got a lot of nice new tools with Neverglade Collector and Caretaker, among others, and Fury from the new set, and Bark Beast. So lots going on here. Since the new set came out, this deck has been on the constant rise. And once again, last week we looked at the data. Last week it probably was already the most popular deck, but because we had the compounded stats, it didn't look like that, because it hadn't caught up to Viheimerdinger, that still was popular, but not as popular as Enduring SI. So once again, the reset of the data here helps to see more clearly that this has long overtaken Viheimerdinger, despite it not looking that way in the last 1 or 2 weeks due to how the data is compiled. It also is much more reflective of my experience on ladder. I'm not seeing that much Viheimerdinger, but you're playing against like Enduring SI like all the time, sometimes multiple games in a row. It's just very, very popular and dominant. And yeah, it's also a really strong deck, so it's not surprising, and especially for the sample size that it has, it's by far the best performing deck at this sample size, and there are only few decks performing better with reasonable but smaller sample sizes. But we'll see that in a moment once we look at the top 5 highest win rate decks, which we're going to do now. In 5th place, we have good old Deep. It's still kind of like hanging on there by a thread, mostly because other higher win rate offerings have too small of a sample size to realistically consider here, in my opinion, partially also because there's a lot of diversity among the larger archetypes. Like you have like 400 something games, but the highest game count per individual list is like 50-ish games, so you don't even have an agreement on what the archetype mostly looks like, let alone a lot of sample size to base anything on. So I resorted to Deep as one of the options here, and 75.5% is still reasonable. It's like it's certainly a bit of a gap to what the other decks look like, but it kind of I guess makes sense if you have sort of a tier 1 of win rate decks that is less than 5 decks, then you're inevitably gonna have 1 or 2 tier 2 win rate decks in place 4 or 5 to round out a top 5. But that's not bad. That gives us basically, in terms of win rate, the tier 1 win rate decks and the best tier 2 win rate decks in a way, to give you a nice selection of top performing decks to choose from if that's what you want to select your deck based on. So yeah, Deep still around. Not much has changed. Still the same criticism from me. This list is basically the same as in the past. Still don't get why you ever wouldn't run 3 Jettison or like 3 Abyssal Eye, and why Aristocrat over Thorny Toad and so on. There are just some really random numbers here. So not the biggest fan of this list, but it is the most popular and one of the highest performing lists of Deep out there. But I think that largely has to do with not a lot of people investing into that archetype right now and trying to optimize it, would be my guess, because I can't believe this version is near optimal. Also, personally, not a big fan of that archetype. The archetype has some very pronounced strengths, but at the same time also like equally many glaring weaknesses. So it's kind of like a hit or miss, in my opinion and experience. So yeah, I never liked the deck too much past the initial like sort of normal game phase when the set came out, and it looked super overpowered and pushed until we figured out more of the metagame and realized it actually kind of has a lot of issues and isn't overpowered at all, despite the individual cards seemingly being very pushed. Next, in number 4, we still have Burn hanging around. Win rate went up a bit as opposed to before. Not too surprised. We have no compounding weeks here anymore. People have really moved on from Burn, so they're much more susceptible. So if you play Burn these days, you probably get a higher win rate than before the nerfs, ironically. So still a very viable strategy in my opinion, and this is still the list I would recommend. Next, we have Viheimerdinger, not just popular, also still very good. Third most popular deck and third highest win rate deck, so very fitting. One of the cases where we have a correlation between win rate and popularity, and the win rate's pretty high at almost 61, and it's the win rate that we have seen the deck at for quite some time, around 60-61%. So it is a very like sort of meta stable, consistently well-performing tier 1 deck that won't change anytime soon, probably without major changes to the card pool and or format. Then we have Shadow Owl's Freljord, the Enduring SI deck again. It's a bit more popular than it ranks in terms of win rate, but that might change going forward. But yeah, win rate is slightly above Heimerdinger. You can see a bigger discrepancy in popularity between Enduring SI and Viheimerdinger relative to the discrepancy in their win rate, but I guess it makes sense. Viheimerdinger has been dominant for longer, so people gravitate to the newer thing that is doing well in a way. As well as, this deck hasn't been figured out for that long in terms of what the ideal version is, and so on. So there are a bunch of factors at play here, but both are basically equally strong decks, and they are two of the pillars of the current format, I would say. But without further ado, let me give you the highest win rate deck of the last week. It's once again Elusive Burn. I think it has been the last 1 or 2 weeks actually. So yeah, this deck is doing really well. The win rate keeps being close to 63%. The popularity is rising, so we will probably soon be closer to a smaller disparity between win rate and popularity, with the deck being on the rise right now, and see how the win rate will stabilize with a larger sample size and more popularity and people playing better against it and so on. But yeah, it seems to be a force to be reckoned with and here to stay. So you better either learn it or learn how to play against it to improve your win rate against it, and probably throw out some deck choices that are particularly poor against this and similar stuff, since elusives are on the rise in various forms again. But yeah, that's all I have in terms of decks for you this week. We'll moving closer and closer to the next balance patch, which will probably give us bigger changes. Curious to see what they're going to change. I think it's not super clear which cards will be changed. There are obviously some strategies that are on pretty high up on the list to potentially be touched down a bit, but I feel like right now we're not necessarily in a position where there are some super egregious outliers. Like Enduring SI might have a bit too high of an overall card quality of individual cards. It might need some toning down, but I still don't feel like the strategy as a whole is super overpowering. It is just very good against certain things and struggles against others and stuff like that. But we'll see what Riot thinks and how they plan on shifting things. And I could certainly use a shake up right now. Things are starting to get a bit like repetitive and stale again. So I'm looking forward to changes. Until then, you know the drill. If you enjoy the content, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel down below, turn on the notification icons to not miss out on future content. I'll try to also get you some more deck techs in the coming days. And yeah, show the sponsors some love in the description down below. All information you need is in the description usually. And if you want to further support your favorite content creators on YouTube, please consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock, or just turn off your adblock for YouTube entirely. All the creators you watch will greatly appreciate that, and it's completely free. So thanks for that. Yeah, that's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.